All right, welcome everyone to the weirdest winter quarter 2022 ever. We've got a wonderful presentation today in our series. Our series is the Community of Practice Sessions hosted by the Student Affairs Assessment Initiative group here at UCSB. We are making an effort to have a theme this year around our Community of Practice Sessions, and our theme right now is highlighting student affairs professionals who have done recently or who are doing graduate work. And launching that series is Dr. Sara Cook today, who comes to us from the Registrar's office. I will let Dr. Cook introduce themselves and introduce their topic, but I do want to put out a call for anyone here who knows someone who has recently completed a graduate degree or who is currently working on one perhaps, and you think would be an outstanding contributor to this series. We'd love to know their names. You can write a direct message to myself or Gary or David, and we will reach out to them in hopes of highlighting their work in the future. Again, these sessions are designed for student affairs staff to think more critically and openly about their assessment practices and the variety of ways that departments in our division are doing this "how do we tell our story" thing. And so today we're going to hear from an outstanding colleague who has done work at the graduate level. Without further ado, join me in welcoming awkward Zoom clap for Sara, everyone. Yay, Sara. And I'm going to continue recording, but put you on speaker view. Go, Sara, go.
Great, thank you. Thank you so much, Mark. And thanks everybody for being here. So I will just kind of jump in. I've just got some kind of introductory opener questions, and then I'll just go through my presentation. And then I think we'll for sure have time for questions at the end. I completed my doctorate last year, 2021. So it's still fairly fresh in my mind, but I haven't given this presentation in a while. But my topic was transfer students at the university level, and specifically looking at their time to degree, because that's a big milestone that universities still use to track progress and success, both for freshman admits and for transfer admits. So just kind of as an opener question, if you work specific, I mean, I suppose everybody here works with transfer students, but if you kind of specifically differentiate between students as a transfer student versus a freshman, do you have any kind of general impressions, or are there trends that you're seeing in your line of work, in your roles? And if you had to pick a few words to describe transfer students, what might you pick to describe transfer students? And you're welcome to put in the chat, or if you'd like to unmute yourself, feel free.
I can share a little about what I see in CLAS. So I work in the writing center. So we do see transfer students come through a lot in the writing center.
Yeah.
Some of the things I've noticed is they usually need more like evening hours for tutoring. A lot of them seem to really appreciate the help, not like any more or less than other students, but they are more vocal about their appreciation. And a lot of them seem more willing to like reach out for the resources, and like they take the advice and they want all the handouts, and they're really engaged in the sessions that I've had with transfer students and for writing.
Okay, that's great. Yeah, thank you for sharing. Yeah, and I see in the chat, determined, motivated, my best students that have a clear vision for what they want. And I think those are probably all great. I think those definitely encompass transfer students. And some transfers in here as well. Yes, thank you. Yeah.
Sara, I'm curious why you chose to focus on transfer students.
Great question. I mean, the main reason that it came to me initially as a topic is because it is kind of something that is coming up more and more for us, I think, with the push. I kind of started this a few years ago when we had the big push to make sure that all of our admits, at least for every 2 freshmen, there's a transfer admit. I hope I'm remembering that ratio correctly. I think I am. So, you know, and some campuses were already meeting that, some weren't. So I thought it was a very interesting topic to look at, you know, what are the grad rates for transfer students, and you know, working in the registrar's office, especially in the particular unit that I worked in for many years, graduation is one of the things that we process, but we don't necessarily look at the rates specifically. You know, we don't keep track. I mean, that's more of an institutional research thing, but it was just, I was curious to see kind of what are the rates compared to freshmen, and where are other public universities. You know, I mainly looked at California, but kind of what are the rates, and just kind of generally how are they looking, and how can we look at, you know, what factors might be contributing to time to degree, both shorter and longer, based on the data that most universities are already collecting. It's data that we already have that can help us give some insights into where are transfer students finding success, if we're defining success as a degree within 2 years at the four-year university. What are some factors that we can identify as contributing to success in that area, and what might be some factors that are less successful in that area? So that was something that it was, I don't want to say a hot topic, but it's kind of a hot topic. And I wasn't a transfer student myself, but my brother was, and he falls into that statistic of people who did transfer to a four-year but never earned their bachelor's degree. So it's an interesting population. And actually, I know there are a lot of students who intend to transfer and then just never do. So to even have all the students that we have here who have made it through the gate, as they say, to come to the 4 years, already a huge accomplishment, just generally. And then I think like we see here, the determination, the motivation, these students have it for sure in high amounts. So it's, and the more I got into researching it, and the things I found in my study, I just even find it even more interesting now. Sorry, I went on and on. That was like a simple question and I kept talking, sorry. But any questions before we start? Otherwise I can just jump in. Okay. Well, feel free to either put in the chat as I'm going through this, if you have any questions, feel free to put them in the chat, or feel free to unmute yourself, but we will have time at the end also if you'd rather wait till the end. So I'll just go ahead and share my screen. Let me make sure that this works properly. So now if I present, so are you able to see just my slide, or are you seeing my notes?
Seeing your notes as well.
Oh, well. How about now?
Looking good.
Okay. The intricacies of PowerPoint and Zoom. Okay. Okay, cool. All right. Thank you, everybody. So I'm going to go ahead and begin. So this is my presentation from when I defended my dissertation. I haven't really modified it a lot, so definitely please do ask me if you have any questions, but I'll just go ahead and jump in because I'm really excited to share with you the results of my study that I did. So as we know, in California, public universities are facing increased pressure to accept more transfer students. However, the 2-year graduation rate for transfer students is still below what we would like to see as the target. And these low rates might be due to the shock that transfer students experience during their transition process between the community college and the 4-year university. And on top of the pressure to increase the transfer population, universities are being pushed to graduate more of these students and graduate them on time, which is within 2 years of them starting at the 4-year school. So transfer students might take longer to graduate due to reduced course load, changes in major, credit loss between schools, and working full or part-time. And unfortunately, delayed time to degree can lead to increased student loan debt, especially as costs continue to rise, lost time entering the workforce, and lower post-college earnings. And for universities, prolonged enrollments can impact state funding and resources, which can then affect each institution's ability to accept new students, especially as they're trying to increase their admissions. And other downstream impacts, such as lack of housing availability and impacted classes, put a large strain on university resources. So in reviewing the current literature, we know that normative time to degree for a transfer student is 2 years at the four-year university. However, we also know that more students are taking longer than that to earn their bachelor's degree. Oh. Sorry, there's a pop-up there. Okay, the term transfer shock was first described in the literature by Hills in his 1965 meta-analysis. He described it as a severe drop in performance upon transfer. And in other studies, it's typically defined as a dip in grade point average during either the first or second term at the four-year university. Diaz did a more recent meta-analysis in 1992 and reviewed 62 different studies and found that 79% of those studies showed evidence of transfer shock, but also found that most students eventually recover. Sorry. Okay. So in reviewing academic progress, the topics that I looked at were transfer course articulation agreements, credit transferability, student course taking patterns, and progression towards completion of bachelor's degree requirements. California community colleges were designed to prepare students to transfer to a four-year university to complete their bachelor's degree, but the formal articulation agreements between the community colleges and the public four-year schools that define how the courses completed at one institution satisfy requirements at another institution can sometimes be really unclear to students. And many students actually end up losing credit when they transfer, or they have to retake courses at the four-year school, which can delay their degree progression. The formal course articulations that we have in place are specific to each individual course at each individual institution, and they're updated every year. California doesn't have a common course numbering system or universal preparation for specific majors. So transfer students who delay choosing a major, change their major, or delay choosing a school to transfer to also tend to lose credits when they transfer. And additionally, students might not be admitted to their first choice university or their first choice major. And these last minute hurdles have been shown to delay or even stop students from transferring from the community college to a four-year school, like I mentioned. So students that we have at four-year universities really have made a huge leap just to even be at the four-year university. So in 2017, Stephen Handel, Associate Vice President for Undergraduate Admissions for the University of California System, wrote, quote, "Community college transfer, rooted in the notion that any individual, regardless of background or academic preparation, could enroll in an open access college, transfer to a four-year institution, and earn a bachelor's degree, is the most transformative educational experience of the century," end quote. The California Master Plan was designed with the transfer function in mind. However, the discrepancy between our best intentions and the reality of the student transfer experience makes me question if we're keeping our promise to California students. So there's still much that is unknown at this point about these topics and calls for more research. So regarding transfer shock, so far there have been mixed results, and there are a few recent studies, and most don't cover the relationship between transfer shock and time to degree. And transfer shock specifically in major requirements isn't something that's been studied. And we don't know academic progress's relationship with time to degree. So what percentage of major coursework are students actually completing at the community college before they transfer? And overall, what factors contribute to students' extended time to degree? More research is needed, and this study will help to fill these gaps. So I studied what factors relate to transfer student time to degree, focusing on transfer shock and academic progress. So my research question is, what are the relationships among transfer shock, academic progress, and time to degree? And in this study, I looked at two measures of time to degree: how many terms it took a student to earn their bachelor's degree, and whether or not they earned their degree within 2 years. So I looked at two different measures. For transfer shock, I subtracted the student's first term and first year GPAs at the study site from their transfer GPA, and any drop in GPA between the community college and the four-year school was considered to be transfer shock. And I represented academic progress using multiple variables such as major changes, attempted and completed units, their grade point averages, and progression in general education and major requirements. And as we know, each year, hundreds of thousands of students experience the transition event of transferring from a two-year college to a four-year university. And prior research on transfer students has called for more focus on the adjustment process. So for this study, transition theory provided the avenue for me to do just that. Transition theory uses the 4S model to represent potential sources of strength or weakness for any individual going through a transition. And the more an individual is able to positively utilize the situation, aspects of the self, their supports and strategies, the better they will fare in their transition experience. So this study focused on variables and characteristics of the self, as well as supports that the students underwent in the transition to the four-year university, and how those variables acted either as assets or liabilities for a student in the transition. And for the purpose of this study, a transition was viewed as more successful if the student did not experience a dip in their grade point average, so no transfer shock at the four-year university, and if they were able to graduate with their bachelor's degree within 2 years. So for this quantitative study, I used existing data collected from the Office of Institutional Research and the Office of the Registrar databases at my study site. I used a correlational design in order to see if and how multiple variables influenced each other. I used Aston's input environment output model as my methodological framework because I wanted to analyze the unique effects of students' entering characteristics and their college environment factors on their college outcomes. So the main hypothesis for this study is that there is a relationship among transfer shock, academic progress, and time to degree. And I developed three null and alternative hypotheses based on the input environment output framework. And I grouped my study variables into three sections that represent first student characteristics prior to entering college, so the input, and second, behaviors and experiences at the community college, so environment number 1, and third, behaviors and experiences at the four-year university, so environment number 2. And I used SPSS to conduct my analyses. I ran frequencies, chi-squares, ANOVAs, and correlations to determine the relationships between the independent and dependent variables. I ran both linear and logistic regressions to predict time to degree from my set of independent variables. And the regression analyses were hierarchical since I had levels of nested data that needed to be considered in relation to one another. And the variables were examined for linear relationships and multicollinearity to ensure their suitability for inclusion in the regressions. This is a short description of the population at my study site, which I called Central University for the purpose of my study. The population was drawn from the incoming class of transfer students in fall 2014, and only students who attended at least one California community college were included in the final population, which was a total of 1,487 students. Underrepresented minority students included Latino, Chicano, Native American, and Black students, which is consistent with the study sites definition of URM. And for the purpose of this study, socioeconomic status was represented by receipt of a federal Pell Grant, and Pell Grants are typically awarded only to students from low-income families and are generally a reliable indicator of students' financial resources and are typically used in the literature. So here's another breakdown of the study population based on first generation status and ethnicity. So on the admissions application for this university, a student indicates their highest level of education achieved for each parent. So I use that information to create new variables representing the highest level achieved by either parent. And then I use that to calculate two variables for first generation status, and I'll talk more about that in the next slide. For ethnicity, I created a category for Asian, which included Japanese, Filipino, Pacific Islander, East Indian, Pakistani, Vietnamese, Korean, and other Asian. So in this study, 65.3% of the students earned their degree within 2 years or less. And this is a summary of the descriptive statistics for characteristics for those students. So the students who completed their degree in 2 years or less. So for first generation, this chart defines it as neither parent ever attended any college. And this is an alternative definition of first generation that's sometimes used in the literature. The Higher Education Act and the study site typically define first generation as neither parent has completed a bachelor's degree. But in the analysis that I conducted using the HEA definition, I didn't find any significant relationships between first generation status and time to degree. So I used the alternative definition in this analysis here and in my regression analyses as well. Oh, and there's the statistics there. Okay, so to review the specific regression variables for my study, oops. Okay, sorry, it stopped sharing. I'm not sure why.
I'm not sure why either. Are you still host? Yeah.
Yeah, I think so.
Okay, maybe just click it
Oh.
again.
It's a Zoom gremlin.
It is gremlin. And now it's telling me it must be something with PowerPoint because now it's saying, do you want to recover your document? Sorry about that, everybody. Okay. Okay. Except now I can't see Zoom. That's quite odd. Anyway, we'll keep going. Okay, so block one had my student demographic characteristics in it. That was the input. Block two added information about students' time at the community college. And here IGETC is the comprehensive pattern of courses that California Community College transfer students can complete to satisfy lower division general education requirements at California public universities. And block three added variables about the student's time at the four-year university. And I calculated transfer shock by subtracting the student's first year GPA at the four-year university from their calculated transfer GPA. So a higher number indicated a greater degree of transfer shock. So a drop in their GPA from the community college to the four-year university.
Excuse me for just a second, Sarah. If you
Yeah.
wanted, you could send me the presentation and I could like click along maybe.
Oh, is it not sharing? Oh, sorry.
It's a technical
Goodness.
issue, I'm sure, but if that's helpful.
I'm so sorry about that.
There it goes. You're back on your
Okay.
notes view, but that's good.
Okay. Oh, and that was not what, okay, there we go. All right. So I'm so sorry. Let me go back to my variables here just to show you. So here are all my variables. Okay. And I'm
Sorry,
sorry.
I know
So
this sounds
yeah.
basic, but could you clarify time to degree is just years, 2 years from their first day they start to the just calendar days. Is that what you're talking about?
Well, yes, that's a great question. Yeah, thank you. I mean, we don't usually track it in days. We usually track it in terms of years. So it's from when a student matriculated, when they started, how many years did it take them, and it usually is really grouped by year, not even by semester or quarter. So it's usually, if you graduated in one of these semesters or quarters after you entered, that's considered 1 year, or in the next year is 2 years and 3 years. Does that help?
Yeah, since your dependent variable, I just was wondering how you entered it. Yeah.
Yes. And so I did, I'm hoping, and let me go to yes. So I actually had two variables that represented time to degree. So in my first linear regression, or I'm sorry, in the linear regression, I used elapsed terms. So here I did really use the specific number of terms at the study site that it took a student to earn their degree. So I sliced it pretty thin, which is typically not what you would see, I think, in a report of graduation rates. But I had the data and I was really curious to see if it would give me some kind of specific results. So I was able to look at that. So in this study, it ranged from 3 terms to 17 terms. And then any students who didn't graduate, I coded those as 18 for the purpose of this analysis. And so the block 1 and block 2 variables, so block 1 being demographic characteristics and block 2 being community college environmental factors, the variables, the ones that remain significant, or the ones that, I'm sorry, they all remained in the same direction, positive or negative, in block 1, block 2, and block 3. And the overall regression model for the linear regression had an adjusted R-square value of 0.154. So that means that 15.4% of the variance in elapsed time to degree was explained by this regression model. And this table shows the results of the linear regression. Sorry, let me click that away there. So I used linear regression to determine which are the most significant predictors of time to degree, using my scale variable for time to degree as my my other variable. So in this chart here, the closer the beta number is to 1, the stronger a predictor it is. So the regression showed that male students and Pell Grant recipient students had longer time to degree. And the more preparation in the major that a student completed at the community college and the higher their GPA in those classes, the shorter their time to degree. And at the 4-year university, find that variable, the higher the student's transfer shock, the longer their time to degree, and transfer shock had the highest beta in this model. Also, STEM major students tended to have longer time to degree. Students who completed more units in their first term had a shorter time to degree. And the other variables listed here were included in the regression model based on the literature that I reviewed, but they didn't enter the model as significant predictors. So that included underrepresented minority and first generation status. And in both regression models, I used the alternative definition, as I mentioned. The amount of major preparation a student completed at the community college was significant, but general education completed via the IGETC program was not. The number of transfer units completed, the amount of major changes a student had, the amount of major prep courses a student had to take, their attendance in the summer after their first year, taking the university transfer experience course, and attending orientation were not significant predictors of time to degree in this model. So I also ran a logistic regression. So this used, instead of using a scale variable with the number of terms that it took the student to graduate, I just had a dichotomous dependent variable. So I either had 1, the student graduated in 2 years or less, or 0, they didn't earn a degree, or they earned a degree in more than 2 years. So I just split them into two groups. And in the logistic regression in block 2, IGETC and pre-transfer major GPA were significant predictors of time to degree, but they fell out of significance in block 3 when I added in variables about the student's time at the four-year university. So as more variables were added, such as transfer shock, major choice, the amount of units completed in their first term, these new variables became better predictors than the block 2 predictors were. So this overall regression model had a pseudo R-squared estimate between 0.163 and 0.241. So this regression was able to predict between 16 and 24% of the variance in time to degree. So I ran the logistic regression for the same variables that I used in the linear regression. And this table shows the results here. So I used logistic regression to predict time to degree from my set of independent variables to determine the impact of each variable on the odds ratio of the occurrence of the dependent variable, so time to degree. So odds ratios greater than 1 indicate a positive relationship with graduation in 2 years, and odds ratios of less than 1 indicate a negative relationship with graduation in 2 years. So based on the odds ratios that I found, the regression showed that female students with lower transfer shock, and those who completed more units in their first term had more chance of graduating in 2 years. Students who received a Pell Grant and those in STEM majors had less chance of graduating in 2 years. And as percentage of major preparation completed pre-transfer increased, students had more chance of graduating in 2 years. So this is just a quick summary of both of the regressions. So the adjusted R-squared in the linear regression indicates that 15% of the variance in time to degree can be predicted by this model. And in the logistic regression, the combination of variables help predict 79.4% of time to degree correctly. The independent variables were better at helping to predict who would graduate within 2 years or less, which was correct 95.2% of the time, versus those who graduated in more than 2 years or didn't graduate at all, which was only correct 32.5% of the time. So it was better at predicting who would graduate within the 2 years. So based on the 2 regression analyses, the null hypothesis was rejected and my alternative hypotheses were partially supported because there was a relationship between academic progress, transfer shock, and time to degree, but some of the variables that I originally predicted would be strong predictors were not, such as first generation status and IGETC completion. So in reviewing the questions that hadn't yet been answered back at the beginning, most students do still experience some degree of transfer shock, both after 1 term and after 1 year. And a majority of students in the study experienced some degree of transfer shock. 76.5% experienced some drop in GPA after 1 term, and 84.3% experienced some drop after 1 year. And there was a significant difference in the degree of GPA drop based on time to degree. So students who graduated within 2 years experienced a lower degree of transfer shock than students who took more than 2 years to graduate or did not graduate at all. But transfer shock specifically in major requirements didn't have any impact on time to degree. So only looking at the overall GPA had any significance. And students who completed more coursework in their major pre-transfer and who had a higher GPA in that coursework tended to graduate in a shorter amount of time. So students who graduated within 2 years or less completed an average of 68% of their major preparation at the community college. And students who graduated in more than 2 years or didn't graduate at all completed an average of only 38% of their pre-major requirements prior to transfer. So pretty big difference. And overall, both demographic and environmental factors contributed to extended time to degree. Being male, being a Pell Grant recipient, being in a STEM major, having a higher degree of transfer shock, and having fewer units completed in the first term at the 4-year were all predictors of longer time to degree. So the findings in my study do support the 4S model of transition theory. And I looked specifically at aspects of the self and supports during a student's transition from the community college to the 4-year university. The study found that being male, being a Pell Grant recipient were liability aspects of the self. Orientation and the transfer experience course as university supports were assets for Pell Grant recipient students that seemed to help balance out the liability of being a Pell Grant recipient based on the simple analyses that I conducted, so not part of the regressions. However, for male students, attending orientation was actually an additional liability that appeared to extend their time to degree. College and university supports that became assets became assets, when they were able to help students complete general education requirements via IGETC, complete more of their major preparation coursework pre-transfer, and persist to graduation without changing majors, and complete more units in their first term at the 4-year university. Other aspects of the self and institutional supports were neither assets nor liabilities in either of the regression models, such as underrepresented minority status, first generation status, orientation attendance, and the transfer experience course. So awareness of the potential assets and liabilities, both of the self and the university supports, can really help students and school personnel prepare for and encourage a successful transition between the community college and the 4-year university. So the findings of this study have implications for both policy and practice. Consistent with the literature, Pell Grant recipient students took longer to graduate. They were also less likely to enroll in the university's transfer experience course. And simple analyses showed that the Pell students who did take the transfer experience course had a better time to degree. So Pell Grant recipient students should be required or at least strongly encouraged to take that course. And this might require that the university add more seats to that course, as there were very few compared to the number of transfer students. There were only 200 seats available to this cohort, and there were almost 1,500 students in the cohort. And contrary to the other groups, though, the Pell students who attended orientation had significantly shorter time to degree. So I would also recommend that Pell Grant recipient students be encouraged or possibly even required to attend orientation, and that universities should offer fee reductions and fee waivers for Pell students so that they are able to attend orientation. And this study also found, as many others have, that the differing policy structures between the California community colleges and the public 4-year schools create a lot of unnecessary hurdles for transfer students. And future policies really need to require and incentivize coordination between the systems, specifically for major requirements. The amount of major preparation completed at the community college was a significant predictor of time to degree in both regression models. And students who took longer to graduate or didn't graduate at all only completed 38% of their major preparation requirements prior to transferring, whereas students who graduated within 2 years had an average of 68% of their major preparation already completed before they transferred. So this was a really big difference. So the California community colleges and the CSUs and the UCs need to update their articulation agreements to help students transfer with their entire major preparation complete. And one suggestion would be to pilot changes with STEM majors, since they tended to already have longer time to degree, and to create standardized major preparation curriculums across the systems that all the subject matter experts can agree on. The California public higher education system has to focus on improving the transfer function and renewing its promise to California students that they can transfer and earn their degree on time. So this study found that the number of units completed after the first term and transfer shock after the first year were significant predictors of time to degree. And 4-year university advising offices should use this information to outreach to students who might be at risk after the first term and the first year. And students in non-STEM majors and those that change their major less frequently had better time to degree. So advisors at both the community college and the four-year schools can use this information to encourage students to choose a major early and choose one that they will want to stick with. And it could have an even more significant impact if the inter-system policies around major preparation are improved. But most importantly, the variables related to the student's time at the four-year university were much better predictors of their time to degree than any of the demographic or the community college variables. So it's really crucial that students know that their time to degree is not predestined. They can set their course for on-time graduation when they arrive at the four-year university. So, and while I did take into account a wide variety of factors in this study, there are a lot of other variables that could impact transfer shock and time to degree that I didn't include. So other environmental variables related to students' time at the community college and the four-year university, like their housing situation, work and family obligations, and extracurricular activities were not taken into account. No variables related to other aspects of the self, such as self-efficacy or motivation, were collected. And while this study examined the effect of some support mechanisms such as orientation and the transfer experience course, other supports such as counseling, advising, mentoring, and tutoring services were not taken into account. Also, the availability of degree applicable courses, both at the community college and the four-year university, were not examined. And this study included only students who attended a California community college, but we know that not all of the CCCs are the same. And this study did not account for variation in academic preparation or any breaks in enrollment or the calendaring system of the community college. So based on the results of this study, these are my recommendations for future research. This study only looked at students who attended California community colleges, but as we know, four-year universities in California serve many other types of transfer students. So future research should focus on other types of transfer students and investigate how they fare in terms of academic progress, transfer shock, and time to degree. And in this study, students who did not graduate were grouped with students who took more than 2 years to graduate in some of the analyses. So we don't know for students who didn't end up earning their bachelor's degree, what caused them to stop out. Also, in the logistic regression, it was only able to predict correctly when a student would take longer than 2 years to graduate or to not graduate at all, 32.5% of the time. So other factors not included in this study really need to be reviewed to determine what led these students to stop out completely. And as mentioned in the limitations, this study did not consider any of the academic difficulty or content of any of the students' coursework. And this could be a really important factor relating to transfer shock and academic progress that requires a lot more research. And since we know that course articulation agreements and major requirements vary across the California public higher education institutions, future research should investigate the impact of students being able to attend their first choice transfer school versus second or third choice. And this could have significant impacts on transferability, credit loss, and the amount of major preparation that they were able to complete pre-transfer.
Hi. Hello.
I have a question. I actually help.
Oh.
I was trying to do FAFSA,
Uh-huh.
and my sister also does FAFSA. She's in
Sorry, I
college.
think maybe not
And
everybody's muted on the
I
call.
think she messed something up with my mom's password.
Give me a sec. Sorry.
That's okay.
I
I'm
think,
sorry.
Mark, you can mute that person.
I'm trying.
Okay. Thanks, everybody. Sorry. Okay. Almost done here. Okay, so because this study found that orientation and the transfer experience course were not significantly related to time to degree, which was contrary to what I expected to find based on the literature, future research should really focus more on the content length and delivery method of orientation and first year experience courses to determine what combination of factors best help support transfer students. And since increased transfer shock was the largest predictor of longer time to degree in the study, future research should focus on what variables are related to and can help reduce transfer shock. So just a quick review. We know that extended time to degree can lead to increased student loan debt, delayed entry into the workforce, and lower post-college earnings. And this study found a relationship between transfer student time to degree, academic progress, and transfer shock. And students who experience more transfer shock and have less major coursework completed pre-transfer tended to have longer time to degree. And overall, variables relating to the student's time at the four-year university were more predictive of their time to degree than any of the variables related to their demographics or time at the community college. And these findings have both implications for policy and practice. And while this study did help contribute to the literature on transfer students, future research should focus more on helping students mitigate transfer shock and graduating more students on time. And thank you. I'll go ahead and stop share. And I think they're, oh yeah, I see
So this
something in the
is where
chat.
we all awkward Zoom clap
Yeah.
for Sarah. Great job, Sarah. And,
Sorry about the snafus there with the Zoom, but yeah.
tech stuff happens. Let's go to either folks unmuting or raising their hands to ask question for Sarah, or you can go to the chat, whatever you all prefer. Lots of great stuff in here though. So I did see a question already in the chat, Sarah, and that was from Anne. Anne, would you mind explaining what you were asking there?
So I'm sorry, it's still kind of following up on the time to degree. So you said you did course terms lapsed, which I think is excellent. The more discrete, the better. But did you just take their start and their end and subtract, or did you actually look at each time, like if they had gaps, if they took summer?
Yes, excellent question. So I did just look at when did they start, when did they finish, count 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. So if they did have a break in enrollment, that was not really represented. It wasn't, terms completed. It was just terms elapsed.
Terms that were offered between when they started. And so, yes, so that's what I think would be one thing to look at, is actually how many terms they actually cost to degree, in other words, right? And did they take summer? Because they could finish less and have higher cost. They could take longer and have less cost. So it is, we'll throw that out there. And then I had one other quick question. This is the easier one. So I noticed you said male and STEM. And I wondered if those seem to be correlated, sadly. More males take STEM. And I wondered if you calculated if that was a, if there was like a correlation between those two variables.
Oh, that's super interesting. Yeah, I don't think I did a simple analysis that looked at the relationship between male and STEM majors.
Because they seem to be related. Yeah, okay.
But you're right.
But this is excellent. Thank you. This was such a great, thank you so much for sharing this. Really great.
Yeah, thank you. But I really do like your question about costs of terms, and looking at, was it just a lapse, or was there a cost there?
Cost to degree.
Yeah, cost to degree.
Cost to degree, yeah.
That would be really interesting. Yeah.
Well, and it makes me think about interventions that are summer oriented as well. And so I'm thinking about, it's not just the cost, but also when those interventions could take place, and thinking about that summer transition. So yeah, I'm with this is interesting. And if this is a crucial moment, then perhaps that moment has more area for intervention. We can focus on that. Good stuff. Okay, other questions from folks? I'll let Sarah wield those.
I have one question.
Yeah.
One thing that affected me, and that I hear from other students too, is how going from the semester system to the quarter system at UCSB really affects them. And I wonder like how that might play into the transfer shock aspect too, because like I even went and pulled up my transcript from when I was a student and saw the dip in my GPA the first quarter here. And I know that for me, it was like a very stressful feeling, like 10 weeks versus 16. And I wonder if there's any research about that in particular.
Yes, I haven't seen any, I don't remember seeing any quantitative studies that looked at that, but you do see it a lot in the qualitative studies where they've interviewed students. And I think especially in California, especially if you're looking at UCs, because most of the UCs are quarter and a lot of the community colleges are semester. I mean, there's some quarter community colleges. And same within the CSUs, there's some semester, some quarter. But yes, it definitely is a factor, especially when you read the qualitative literature on that. A lot of transfer students mention that, that it is a transition to get used to that new calendaring system. I think especially if you're coming from semester and going to quarter, because it is so much faster, and it's so I didn't take it into account in this particular study. I didn't have any variables that represented the calendaring system of where the students came from versus the calendaring system at the study site. So I didn't have that, but that's definitely something that is a factor in the literature for sure. Yeah. Mark.
Sarah, my question is kind of related to that, and Kristen made me think of it. So I'm wondering if you've read any of the literature around something you recommended, which is that the transfer student success course obviously had an effect, but yet it's limited to only the 200 who were able to take it.
Right.
I'm wondering if you've seen any literature around if there are significant increases or predictors in terms of these academic progressive successes when a class is required versus the 200 students that chose that class. So I can't help but think the 200 students that choose that class are probably going to do well anyway because they were smart enough to choose that class. What
Right.
about when it is required? Do you have any models out there? Is there anybody written about when it is required, whether it's still a predictor of success?
That's a really good question. I don't remember off the top of my head reading any studies that specifically looked at that, but I have a feeling you're on the right track with that, because you're exactly right. Who gets to choose, who's choosing to take that course? And I mean, were there students who had depending on when they registered, did they have a later time and the course was already full when they wanted to get in, but they couldn't? And I think the other thing that I don't think I really mentioned was, at this particular study site, when I did the study, there was only one course offered. And I know it's not always that there is just one course. Sometimes there are multiple courses that are offered for transfer students, either both in the first term or sometimes even the second term. So that's another thing that wasn't really taken into account in this study, just because at the study site there was only the one option. So it could be that if there are other courses offered in the second term, maybe that's, maybe students are identified as like, you had a difficult first term, we recommend that you take this in your second term. That could have I don't want to say redeeming is not the right word, but
Helpful. It would be helpful.
Yeah.
Yeah, I was thinking something similar. I was thinking about all of the wonderful summer programs. And then I was thinking about the impact of that. But then I also think about, wait, who goes to a summer program? And it's not required, right? So, and so that was the thought I had, was like, it's kind of like schools of choice. Well, who's filling out the application? And would those students have actually done well anyway, because they're the types to fill out that application? So I do wonder about that requirement and what it looks like when it's required of all.
Right. Right. And I suppose I guess just kind of generally, I don't really remember in the literature how much of this is required, but I don't think we really see at the university level a lot of requirements for kind of extra degree requirement activities, kind of specifically for transfer students, like attending special programs, attending certain things that might be available. They're not required. It usually is, it's your option. So it is really up to the student to take the initiative to attend those, or to sign up for that class, or sign up for the tutoring, sign up for the special program. So yeah, that would be an interesting study to see schools that have things like that as requirements, how that impacts their time to degree. Great question.
Other questions for Sarah, y'all?
Yeah.
Oh, the awkward Zoom silence. Got to love it. Gotta love it. Okay, I think it's fair. We're at 12 o'clock now. I think what I'm going to do is I'm going to stop recording. But first, can we all show some love for Dr. Cook, and congratulations for Dr. Cook on completing this project and representing the Student Affairs family so well. Again, graduate work on top of doing full-time work, y'all. This is life-changing stuff. So props to you, and thank you so much for sharing with all of us implications for our work as well. I'm going to stop recording now.